Hi, I'm Bob Keiser, Vice President with Global Markets Intelligence at S&P Capital IQ. We received a good number of questions following today's Housing Outlook webinar that we weren't able to address during the formal session, so we thought we'd take the opportunity to address a few of these questions via video. So the first question we're going to follow up on is, will the decreased supply of existing homes allow housing starts to grow to a 1.5 million annualized rate without crashing the prices again? Well, the level of existing single-family homes offered for sale actually fell quite dramatically over the second half of last year to some of the lowest levels on record. So the supply-demand imbalance is definitely helping to prop up home prices on a very short-term basis. The housing market has lacked historically normal levels of participation recently, so I think it's fair to conclude that this is largely a very illiquid market. A normalizing market should allow for an uptick in the rate of both existing and new home sales, so I think the chances of a rebound to starts to a 1.5 million annualized rate is reasonably good absent economic recession. Second question, in your opinion, how do you think the improvement we've seen thus far will be addressed by the Fed? Will they continue to ease, and if so, for how long? Well, it's a very good question. Nobody seems to know the answer. The Federal Reserve says they're targeting a 6.5% unemployment rate and has vowed to leave the Fed funds interest rate at 0.25% until it looks as though we're about to reach the 6.5% target, which market participants generally believe will occur sometime in late 2014 or early 2015. Between now and then, they will change or taper the degree of excess monetary accommodation in the system by reducing the amount of securities purchased in the open market, depending on the pace of improvement in the U.S. labor market. Keeping an eye on payroll growth, jobless claims, the labor market participation rate, and trends in wage growth to determine if the Fed is engineering a substantial improvement in the labor market conditions seems like a good bet for gauging the extent of monetary accommodation and the path of future Fed policy. Third question, from the analysis provided thus far, is it fair to conclude that interest rate normalization and/or yield curve historical normalization, in other words, tightening, is more of a medium-term matter absent any sovereign credit issues that would exert inflationary pressures on the U.S. economy? And normally I would say yes, this would definitely be a medium-term phenomenon. But for the past year or so has demonstrated that perceptions about the economy can change very dramatically over very short periods of time. The outlook for inflation is very different today core inflation at 1% today versus 2% a year ago. We've had to deal with multiple episodes of risk of the summer swoon, and most recently the sequester, and a continued sustained subpar recovery that has dumbfounded conventional wisdom at various points in time. So I think it pays at this point to pay very close attention to the signals coming back from the marketplace. Inflation is going to be very core to the outlook for interest rate policy and the degree of tapering if it occurs from the Fed, which is going to exert pressure on the slope of the yield curve, but also labor market-centric conditions, because the Fed has said they are obviously targeting an improvement, a substantial improvement in labor market conditions, and the pace that the Fed is able to achieve a substantial improvement will dictate the pace of changes in Federal Reserve policy going forward. So that's all the time we have for following up on our questions. We appreciate your participation and look forward to engaging you in future discussions. Thank you very much. For S&P Capital IQ, I'm Bob Keiser.